let's kick this off and ask the harder questions, and hopefully we can debate. And I will start with, the question that everybody now is asking: what governance structure are required to align the interest of public and private stakeholders across regions? And how should it be institutional home, secretariated, steering group, multilateral form be designed? So how is it going to be? And I will start with you, Roy.
I've got no idea. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me, the Danube Institute, and Signal Group. Great to be here. This is a tricky one, for sure. You have a lot of... what's interesting about IMEC is that it's not happening in a vacuum, right? You've got a variety of different geopolitical trade corridors and just links happening in different parts of the world. This is different because it's not, we're comparing BRI to IMEC. It's not a BRI. This is not just about a rail link or a port link. It's multilateral with countries which are quite different. They're different from the regulations they have, the types of governance that they have internally, their financial structures, their decision-making capability. It's different because it's not just about logistics. It's also about the connection of data, the connection of energy, and so on and so forth. And what we're also understanding from the previous panels is that there are some conversations happening. So there's a steering committee that is happening between India and the UAE. But to get the other countries involved, there has to be a few things which take place. And if you look at other projects out there, some of them are indeed multilateral, and some of them are just managed by contractual obligations. Here, we're probably going to be looking at something which is a mix, and starts off with being an entity, a legal entity that is governed with senior leaders, minister level or something at that level, who are owning with a share in this entity, whatever that is. You need to have a person who is the authority. That authority can move from one person to the next every couple of years. But there's got to be a general secretary who is the person who is calling an invitation for these for the other representatives, and under which you would have. I'm thinking about 4 committees, maybe more, but at least 4 committees, and each committee is going to have needs to also have somebody who's from the private sector. And the committees are going to have to look at regulation. How do you make sure that there is smooth border control passage and regulatory frameworks that allow for passage of goods, tariffs for energy. If the gauges are going to be different width, how do you have the ability to minimize the slowness of that? So that's a regulation committee. You need to have a financial committee, which is going to look at what is a public good, what is going to go for the private sector. We talked a lot about public-private partnerships. That committee is going to have to look at those things. You're going to have a situation where there are an authority looking at the finances. If this is an entity, it's going to need to have some budgets, and it has to be managed. And then there's probably going to need to be a fund that allows for the investment into public goods, which is shared across different jurisdictions. You need to have a dispute resolutions capability. So multi-countries are going to have arguments about a variety of things. So kind of a dispute resolution mechanism is going to be essential. And obviously, given the fund region that this is all sitting in, a security committee. Someone is going to be looking at the physical security of all the assets and also the digital security. So a cybersecurity team that's able to protect this from any intervention. One recommendation I would have, and I've seen this work in projects I've been dealing with, and this is not because I'm a consultant or because you're a consultant, but because there's so much volatility and governments tend to disagree on many things. It is a recommendation that a private company actually does a lot of the project management of all of this. It is there to make sure that whatever happens, it continues beyond any kind of political challenge, that there's clear oversight, that there's clear monitoring, that there's also the ability to prioritize what projects happen, when, what's going to drive revenue when, what incentives private companies need. And so that's another recommendation. Let me pause and let others.
Yeah, this is very thoughtful, Roy. And from this, I really want to take the question to Danielle from American perspective and a think tank and a thought leader like you. Who will be leading IMEC? Like, let's address the elephant in the room.
Okay, thanks for having me. Let me first say that there are any number of different models you could have for the governance of this, and then I'll come to who should be leading. The Belt and Road is clearly a very top-down model. China basically says we're going to do this, and then you have a series of countries that are signatories to it, and then China kind of presents this is what we're going to be doing, and there are pluses and minuses to that model, but that is one model. I certainly think what Roy was talking about, having some kind of networked approach or some sort of networked model is something along the lines of what you're ultimately going to need, or some kind of a steering group. I do think, frankly, I think that the Trump administration has indicated some interest in IMEC. The Biden administration, were present at the creation and supported IMEC. But I think it would be smart if some of the middle powers championed this and took this on. That someone's going to have to take on the transaction costs of making this happen. I think I want to give credit to the Danube Institute and our hosts, along with Signal, for putting this conference together, because these sorts of things take a lot of work and require a lot of transaction costs. So I would suggest that there are several things that need to happen and I think Ambassador Carlos Sanz was talking about, we need to create a timetable. I would suggest it's even more prosaic than that. There are several things we need to do. We need to catalog the economic opportunities if this is actually done. Like, specifically speak to, okay, if we do this, these are the contracts that will actually happen if this actually happens. Then we need to make an efficiency case. If we build this, instead of 10 days on a boat, it'll take 7 days on a boat. We need to make those very prosaic and specific. We need to make a very specific cataloging exercise. Third, it would be quite useful to have some sort of tracking of the progress of this. I think it's fabulous that this is a compelling vision. We need to now be able to kind of track, okay, well, this year, this part of the road's going to be built, or this year, this is. Then fourth, we're going to need some way of having some ability for people to take advantage of, well, there's going to be a bid on the rebuilding of X port, or there's going to be a bid on delivering the construction of this railway. There's going to need to be a lot of, so some of this could be through some sort of extra governmental effort. I'm in the think tank business, so like the consulting business, where I'm always looking for self-employment opportunities. But it seems to me that a network of capable think tanks who are invested in this could perfectly well capture and track this. My institution, for a long period of time, tracked kind of the construction of the Belt and Road Initiative. I think that's great, except we were sort of observers, watching it. I'd rather have some people who've got some stake in the business in terms of saying, we're building this and let's bring people together to accelerate it, as opposed to saying, look at what China's doing. I'd like to have something that with a little bit more stake in it. I do think that, having said all this, I want to go back to the point that I think this is something that Italy could own. So the right think tank in Italy could be a part of this, given the interests of the Trieste government, or the Trieste local government, but also that President Maloney has expressed significant interest in this. I think the Danube Institute, this could be a homework assignment for the Danube Institute. You certainly need an Israeli partner for this, and Signal's obviously an obvious partner. So it seems to me that you could have a network of, I would start with a network of think tanks to capture the economic opportunity, a timetable, tracking progress, convening. And yes, I think you need some sort of higher level than perhaps steering committee, but you need something that's in the private space. Perhaps maybe it's not a company, maybe it's a network of institutes that do this. But it seems to me that, okay, and then where's the United States in this? I think the United States will have a sustained interest in this to the extent that the economic opportunity is made clear. And the economic opportunity for the United States, for American jobs and American workers, has to be made explicitly clear. And so I think that's what's going to sustain U.S. interest in IMEC. This is an out of the United States project. We care about the security of Israel. We care about the stability in Europe. We care about our partners in India and in the Middle East. But to sustain our interest, we're going to have to make clear the economic opportunity for the United States.
Thank you very much. This is very also another thoughtful idea on the table, which is a great segue to my question to you, Mr. Nardini, is how can long-term financing be secured and sustained, particularly in fragile or high-risk zones?
Thank you, everyone. Well, first of all, good afternoon, and many thanks to the Danube Institute for the invitation. And yes, briefly before coming to your question, Italy is committed to IMEC, signed a memorandum, and just recently appointed an envoy to the IMEC, following a little bit the lead of France that did the same last year. In regard to Trieste, we are, as the colleague of mine this morning anticipated, the private operator, Francesco Parisi, the port system, the logistics system, Trieste and Monfalcone, is already serving Central and Eastern European countries, especially via railway. So we have roughly around 10,000 freight trains per annum transporting goods from and to Eastern and Central European countries. But despite the global uncertainties, we keep on investing in increasing capacity, both in terms of vessel acceptance and in terms of railway expansions. I'm speaking of 1 billion euros of private and public funds that are underway, under implementation as we speak. And just to state an example, our capacity of trains is roughly 14,000 trains per year. Thanks to these projects, or infrastructural projects, we are planning to almost double this capacity by year 2030. So we are doing our part in making possible to accept increasing flows of goods also from this huge opportunity, which is IMEC. But I cannot, of course, speak for the Italian government, although I am employed in a public agency which is state-owned, the Port Network Authority of Trieste and Monfalcone ports. I'm sure, and this is a fact, that the Italian foreign minister called for a summit in Trieste this year, in autumn this year, of the foreign ministers of all the IMEC signatories countries. So we will see in few months what are exactly the practical steps that this huge project is taking place. I have my own ideas, and which are pretty much in line with yours, if I may, in the sense that I see as necessary to create some sort of architecture. So we need some layers and to strike some balance in between coordination and autonomy, because we have very different legal statuses and political statuses in IMEC. But it is also necessary to expect some form of secretariat that carry on the daily basis, daily grievances and issues that a project like this is expected to have. And the only add-on that I might adjust to this framework, a very sketchy framework, is probably also to expect some regional hubs. So to create a European hub of IMEC, a Middle Eastern hub of IMEC, an India hub of IMEC, just to also engage the local communities, because this is a project that has to take on board also in terms of jobs and acceptance from the local communities, the projects that have been carried out. So.
This is exactly very, I mean, this is something we've been discussing, and thank you, gentlemen, but this is now, I would say, we've been discussing the theoretical of the structure and how it's going to be, but may allow me to address the elephant in the room a little bit further and scratch the surface. It might sound like who's first, the egg or chicken, but a lot of other panelists, they discuss like we shouldn't wait. We should start. We don't know when to start, especially like when it comes to Israel, Gaza, the unclear peace between Saudi and Israel, and other regional rivalry. So, Roy, and this is also a question for the panel, how can we put this forward while all these like political, geopolitics risks are taking place, and be bold about it and just make it happen?
Thanks for that question. It reminds me of a project I was involved in regarding EastMed Energy. And every so often when we wanted to launch it, something came up. A new government came in, the politics weren't right, the COVID hit, Ukraine war, obviously October. Every time something happens, you can't move forward. That's called analysis paralysis. You're always thinking about how do you create or plan or do something, and so you can't move forward. So, as a headline for this, whoever's writing a press release after this, analysis paralysis, don't let analysis paralysis get in the way. And I think maybe the Israeli government representative Ophir was talking about this before. There's so much that can be done now that doesn't require the building of a train line or a terminal, that there's no point in waiting. There is, we were mentioning feasibility studies. A feasibility study is a big piece of work, right? I was involved with the Red Sea, Dead Sea feasibility in 2007, 2008. $7 million, 5 different companies, World Bank funded, and it didn't go anywhere, right? But it's a lot of work to look at anything, tenders. There's things you can just do, and whether it's what is it going to cost to do Project A, and how do you factor for different currencies and fluctuations, and every bank that's going to look at putting money against the project is going to look at risk. Sorry.
But maybe it's an opportunity when there is this chaos. For instance, when I like how you do things theoretically, but I'll drag you to the practicality of things. Is like, let's take Gaza, right?
Yeah.
There's an opportunity for Gaza port could be part of the IMEC. Isn't that a plausible?
We were talking about before. An idea of a Gaza port is something that has been around for a while. Arguably the Americans during the war were trying to set up some kind of a little port. The Americans
Nardini is not liking it. It was a competition already.
But so before competition, there are a variety of options.
I had a memory when I was working in the port of Venice. We had a delegation from Israel, and they were planning. This was early 2000. They were planning to build a port for the Palestinians. So this was an issue back then, 25 years ago.
So I don't know if this is another elephant in the room. There's no reason why you wouldn't take this opportunity to look at IMEC and say, IMEC could be also part of rebuilding or reinvesting. It's a job creation. It's something that I think would make a lot of the parties in the region quite happy to think about it that way. But I don't know if that is still I think that is still in the theoretical regardless.
Maybe Danielle can shed some light on other Turkey, Iran. How can we do this in a way that actually started?
I would avoid the elephants in the room. So I would actually work around the elephants in the room. I think if we're going to wait to kind of solve the elephants in the room, this will never get done. So I think about other projects like the Trans-Caspian corridor, where if you look at Central Asia, they're excited about building a big project through Iran. I just don't think the West, the Asian Development Bank or others are going to be super excited about financing a project in Iran. Or let's build a project through Afghanistan and it's going to be 4 times the amount of cost and 4 times the amount of time. Or let's build a railroad through Xinjiang and see how many people get excited about that. So the Trans-Caspian corridor is sort of or let's go through Russia. Right now there's all sorts of sanctions. Maybe in a week there won't be, but probably will be. So my point is the Trans-Caspian corridor is an answer to a problem, which is, trade is passing through Central Asia like a balloon. In theory, IMEC is a solution to a potential problem of that there could be additional flows. My view is, whether it's Iran or I do think there's going to be some speed bumps, which is whether we get peace in our time between Saudi Arabia and Israel this year or 5 years from now. This is probably a 20-year project to do all of these things. So and I wouldn't spend too much time about figuring out whether we're going to get peace in our time. I mean, I hear you that there are potentially, I'm going to call ancillary opportunities, such as like a port in Gaza or not, or what happens. And so, with that, but I would just say that we should focus on the achievable now. I think there's a series of very boring but important exercises that would need to happen to make IMEC for real. And I would go back to sort of, of course, this is where I'm sitting, right? So let's come up with a timetable. Let's come up with making the case for why this is worth the effort. Let's come up with the actual advantages are beyond the idea of like we're just all in a room and wouldn't this be a nice thing? But instead of 10 days on a boat, it's going to be 8 days on a boat, and this is $1 trillion opportunity. And then say, okay, and if we figured out Gaza, it'd be $1.1 trillion, and if we solved Iran, that'd be $1.2 trillion, and if we got peace in our time between Israel and Saudi Arabia, it'd be $2 trillion, right, or something. So my point is, I hear you that there are a series of elephants in the room. I think we should take achievable steps now, and then be opportunistic as the situation on the ground changes, and we should take it from there.
Thank you very much. And I think that this is where achievable, or I would say actionable steps are my next question to you, Nardi, is if I may say that, is that when you say actionable, or when we say, I agree with Danielle, how, can you convince, since you're in the kind of like public-private sphere, how can you convince stakeholders, investors, to come and put money, whether it's government or institutions, to invest, right? So they want these kind of actionable, steps, but there are things that are out of control. So what would be the recipe to go do these pitches?
Well, the case study of Trieste is a lucky one then, because we managed to take on board private investors pretty easily. And Francesco Parisi could also testify that, because we had on board in recent years Port of Hamburg, for instance, or the Hungarian government that chose a location in the port of Trieste to build a new terminal. And the Italian government put money in the mix, so it's a public-private partnership, or these are private partnership projects. The appeal, of course, is given by the geographical position of Trieste, which, as we said, is serving perfectly Central and Eastern European countries throughout this existing railway network that just needed minor investment or selective investments to be revamped or empowered. And also thanks to legislative measures taken at the EU level, like the liberalization process that opened up the market to private undertakings in railway traction sector. And all these are case scenarios for IMEC, because the Trans-European Transport Network is a good example of, for instance, cross-border interoperability of different railway systems. Of course, the cons of this might be an excessive legislation attitude or a regulation attitude, like sometimes the European Union has been called against or about, and this is something not to do or to repeat. But there are some very good examples.
Thank you very much. Also, something very interesting Dr. Ibtisam mentioned is the track 2, right? And Question also for you, gentlemen, on the panel. If we want to bring track 2 with the existing potential states and government or non-government entities, one, what are the guarantees that we can provide or can be presented for track 2 for the members to like start discussing? Second, I think, Roy, you have ideas of like who else should be included in the IMEC.
I'll start with the second. I think conversations I've had with people in this room who have good suggestions. There's something very manageable about the actors we have now and the geography that we have now, and that's probably important to keep it as such. But we can't ignore the fact that there are other developments happening globally, one region to the left, one region to the right, which are as important for the Middle East, as important for Europe, and as we think about IMEC, we need to take these under consideration. Obviously, Africa is a big thing, and I don't think we've heard of Africa today yet. A lot of links in Africa, both in Western Africa, so I think Angola, DRC, Zambia, a way to get some of the critical minerals out going west, Kenya, Ethiopia, South Sudan, an entry point. We're designing, this map. I'm not suggesting that we add another geography could complicate things further, but not forgetting that there are going to be opportunities in other region. And just to think about, you're asking about financial feasibility, you're asking about how do you make this work. I think today is a major CEO forum in Cote d'Ivoire, in Abidjan. All of the shipping companies are there. All of the logistics companies are there. They're all looking to see what the opportunities are there. You can't build a complete 20-year project without taking into consideration what's happening in other parts of the world, certainly not in Africa right now. So that's the thing. I hope that answers.
Yes, that answers. But also, the second one, if you may address it, the guarantees, right? Like they say in Arabic that capitals are capital money, or like the owners of capital are cowards. Ras al mal jaban. So what kind of guarantees you can?
I'm not a banker, but I would imagine there are people in this room with banking or financial experience, and you know that the first, I don't know how many pages of any kind of projects are all the risks that come with the project, and you have to go through all the different risks, and there's so many different. Every risk has to be mitigated against in order to secure some kind of funding, and so that's where the responsibility of governments to help private sector overcome the risk, whether it's a regulatory risk. You need to have a situation where somebody can build on the land, with the communities on the land being treated fairly. It could be a currency fluctuation risk. If you're building a project in Jordan and financing it in euros, and then the prices go up or go down, there's going to be a risk. And it's for government, and that's why I suggested these frameworks, because you need to have technical expertise and committees working on identifying all of these. To your point, mapping out not just the project but also the issues, and working through what do the governments need to do to address these things. What are the contracts, and how creative can you be with these contracts? What are the new financial vehicles you're going to create? Are there any green bonds that are going to be issued if there's an environmental project, or an IMEC bond to allow for maybe countries which are not part to finance, and for financial institutions in Wall Street or in London to come in and participate in this. Are there all kinds of projects which, let's face it, and no one's going to make money from building a train line. They're going to make money if they're taking money from goods going back and forth. But the actual project that you build, that's a public good. So governments will probably have to put their hands in their pocket and do that, at least for the beginning. And then if a company comes in and doesn't get revenue back in 5 years or in 7 years, the feasibility study would show it, they need to know that they can come in and have some kind of guarantee for making money. So governments will have to say, we will commit to, and I'm sure the ports know how this works better than I do, we need to commit to a certain level of revenue no matter what, even if 1 year, certainly at the beginning, you're not making enough money, and then give enough credit for companies to make sure that they're incentivized.
Thank you. Danielle, your thought?
Yeah, so I wanted to comment on a couple things. I thought Sergio's comment about, I would like about the small tweaks. I'm going to call it like the low-hanging fruit. There seems to me there's probably a series of, if we could identify what are the easy wins and push on those, that would be a useful thing. What are some actionable, useful, small tweaks we could make, I think is a useful thing. The second thing, when I think about a track 2, I actually would suggest the track 2 ought to be a series of business conferences. I would, instead of having former undersecretary of something come or the former brigadier general X come, which, okay, you can do that, and I think there's potentially some value to that. Far more interesting as a track 2 would be to say, we're going to have a business conference. We're going to have a conversation on IMEC rail. We're going to have a business conference on IMEC ports. We're going to have a business conference on IMEC gas ducts. We're going to have an IMEC conference on the digital aspect of IMEC. And so we would bring people along those lines. Where I do think, if you think about guarantees and you think about, there's the alphabet soup of development finance institutions here in Europe. The Hungarians have one called Corvinus. It's 100% owned by the Hungarian Development Bank. That would be in it. Those sorts of institutions provide financial guarantees. They do project finance. There's a whole alphabet soup of them. Italy has one. I forget what it's called. There's also the network of export credit agencies. All these, if you want to export, you want to export Caterpillar earth movers, or you want to export a power generation from Westinghouse or an SMR model, you're going to use export credit agencies. So you have export credit agencies. Then I look at this map, and I think the Asian Development Bank has an interest in this, should. The EBRD, which is less known, but is sort of the development bank of this post-Soviet space, should have an interest in this. The European Investment Bank, which is in Luxembourg and has got a lot of money, should have an interest in this. The World Bank, IFC, to the extent that the shareholders ride herd on it and tell them to focus on it, they should have an interest in this. So it seems to me there's sort of a network of DFIs, ECAs, regional development banks, that would have interest in this exercise. And then I think there's probably a series of sovereign wealth funds. I don't know if UAE has a sovereign wealth fund. I'm betting they do. The Kuwaitis certainly do. Norway's got one.
Saudi.
Right,
Yeah,
the Saudis have one last time I checked, right? So my point is there's probably lots of pools of capital for this. So again, I would make the case, catalog what's needed, identify short-term needs, think about bringing in business as a stakeholder, having a political stake in this, as well as having an economic stake in this. Make the economic argument and have the economic analysis as why this is worth it, and make the logistics case about if we do this, we're going to save so many days in transit. So feasibility studies matter, financial guarantees or access to project finance. There's plenty of money, I would think, for something like this. So I go back to what I said earlier. I think middle powers have a role to play here. If they're invested in the success of this, in my view, this is something that a small handful of middle powers ought to lead, because I'm sure the United States will have a stake in this, but I think if we're going to wait for the Trump administration to take the lead on this, maybe they will, maybe they won't. I'm sure they will participate in this, and they will make available resources and put some political will behind it. But I think we shouldn't wait for that moment. We should instead, if this is to happen, this is an opportunity for a handful of middle powers to take the lead on it, and then invite the United States to join as a very active participant in some kind of an important role.
Thank you very much, Danielle. Mr. Nardini, building on what Troy and Danielle said, from Italy perspective, from a port perspective, is there anything that should be taken in a special way in terms of guarantees or new players in the game? Can you shed some light on that, please?
Well, I believe that most all of it has been already anticipated by my distinguished colleagues, in the sense that calling for these innovative events, call for these business forums, is the ideal opportunity to have the people in the same space at the same time and presented with a list of needs, pull out and find out solutions and resources, because institutions are out there, capital are out there. And I only wanted to add probably the Global Gateway Initiative of the European Union could be another
Good idea.
because it was born to, in a sense, to reply very lately to the BRI and was born under, let's say, very old project design and concepts. So IMEC came after the Global Gateway. So I believe that that would be another very good, let's say, way to finance this huge project.
Daniel, you seem to have some comment on that.
Yeah, people have been saying we shouldn't underestimate the resources and influence of the European Union. They have a lot of money, and the EU, the European Union has any number of different agencies and initiatives like Global Gateway that could be this. So I think this is something. If this is important to, I think this is something Italy could take a leadership role in. But I also think Italy and perhaps Hungary leading the European Union could push the EU to take some sort of absolutely, whether it's the European Investment Bank, Global Gateway, some of the European Union aid agencies. These are all ways to unlock resources.
Roy?
Yeah, maybe I'll just, not to pour any cold water, I don't want to pour cold water, but just to maybe highlight the growing pressures certainly in Europe when it comes to the needs of finance for pretty major things, starting with defense. I mean, the U.S. is pulling out of Europe, and so when governments are looking at what they need to spend money on, they're spending money on some infrastructure projects, whether it's in the Middle Corridor, whether it's in Africa. There's no reason why they wouldn't spend money on IMEC. It's in their primary interest, but the pressures are mounting. And whether it's on manufacturing in Europe or the defense industry and so on. So we just need to make sure that this is spread across amongst the countries involved. Certainly the UAE's got some significant funding from its sovereign wealth funds. Saudi does, but Saudi I know is spending a lot of money, I'm told, on all kinds of other projects in different parts of the country. Countries such as Israel's got massive amounts of money, but they're all stuck within private financial firms. It's $1.7 trillion sitting in Israeli private insurance firms. How do you create regulation to unlock that? Do the same in Europe. So I think there's also some thinking about where capital exists in the DFIs, IFIs, all the entities that exist, and what can be done to create tweaks too. I like that word. Tweaks in certain parts.
It's a think tank.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I like think tanks. To unleash some opportunities as well.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. I would like to open the floor also for the audience. I'm sure that some of you might have questions. So if you would like to ask our panelists. Apparently not. So I'll actually ask you the question again, which is...
You guys run up there.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I was going to say we were so compelling.
You covered all bases. You covered all the...
Right. We're to sign the check, exactly.
Daniel, I think you made a great summary talking about 4 or 5 or 6 different ways of being practical, focusing on rail, focusing on different types of things. If you could expand on that a bit, because I think so far we've had a lot of theoretical things, but if that, and I looked at some of your background, by the way, it looks like you are really a practical guy with your USAID reforms, etc. So if you could lead us how that could be done in a practical way, I believe that could be the way forward for IMEC. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Thanks very much, if I may. Okay, so a couple of things. So I would have I think a small group of institutions could quickly map out, okay, where are the bottlenecks, and I would work around the big ones like Saudi and Gaza, but let me call the engineering bottlenecks. I would start with that. Then I would have a second track again on, okay, if you had all of those, resolve these, how much transit could go through there, and what kind of opportunities, whether it's for Africa, I think it's an interesting idea, or you know, in terms of where there's spin-off effects of that. What are the then I would have I would begin to bring in various stakeholders to become more invested in this. So in my mind, clearly there's an interest of ports. Clearly there's an interest of shippers. Clearly there's an interest of construction firms. Clearly there should be an interest of the digital economy. Clearly there's an interest, there should be, whether it's the agribusiness shippers of the world, if we talked about dry goods, the dry goods players should have an interest in this. And I would begin to build I would have the intellectual framework, right, of course, I'm at a think tank, right, so I think we got to do another study and et cetera, but I do think bringing in, and this is the sort of roles of companies like APCO and others, is to bring in companies to become invested in this, both in terms of on a practical standpoint, but also to provide political muscle to kind of make this actually come about. So I think, and then look, we can't underestimate whether it's the sovereign wealth funds, these regional development banks, or the European Union have gobs of money. That's also another think tank term. And we should, you know, it's true there are constraints. They're being asked to do different things. But I'd like to believe I also think if you could provide certain kinds of financial guarantees or pay for some of the feasibility studies which could come out of government funding, that a lot of this could be financed through private capital. It doesn't have to be through public capital, but there could be roles for DFIs and ECAs and again, lots of alphabet soup acronyms. But basically there's this network of acronyms that can be deployed in a practical way to make this real. So I think those would be sort of the specific practical things that one would do to make this happen. Again, I wouldn't wait. Let's not wait for Superman or Superwoman to show up and kind of make this happen. I think we're looking at the folks who are going to make this happen. And so my view is we should take some further initiatives. I'm really happy that the Danube Institute and Signal have convened this, because I don't know who else is going to do it. So, I mean, I think I go to a lot of conferences, and this is the first time I've been to a serious IMEC conference. Now, maybe I'm just not on the circuit, but I think this is unique, and I think it's really an excellent conference and an excellent opportunity for us to think about, okay, let's actually operationalize it. And again, I go back to Israel, Hungary, Italy, UAE. In my view, that's the core group that ought to take this on, and then people will follow. That's my practical suggestion.
Oh, sir. Thank you very much, Daniel.
Thank you. Quick question. I would like to understand from your perspective an example of a very positive PPP that you could talk about. So that gives us an idea for the listeners to understand what you consider to be a positive outcome of a PPP situation.
Roy, do you want to take this?
I can give. I think, you know, if we're talking about Port of Trieste as an example, I think most ports, but most major infrastructure projects, which have a strong revenue model, the government has to give the authority for somebody to come in and build it, and then it has to give somebody the license to operate it. Think about energy assets, East Med gas assets. You know, the gas fields are owned by the economic waters of a certain government. The private company takes the risk in drilling and getting the gas, but the government has to give some kind of framework, some of a regulatory framework to do that. In some instances, the government has to actually invest a bit, do a feasibility study, so do a geological study, provide security for the asset, but provide enough for the company, whatever the drilling company, the O&G company, to raise the capital needed to actually do the work at the risk of losing money if it doesn't commercialize. So, you know, when it's successful, it's successful. Sometimes not successful because, I mean, China, I think, has enough examples of projects that it thought would be public-private partnerships because it had companies, Chinese companies, and it had the government backing locally. but it didn't come together. Many of them failed. But in these kinds of projects, you always need some kind of a joint effort for it to be successful. Governments would give a certain lease, 20 years lease, 30 years lease for somebody to operate it. So if we're talking about a rail line, to incentivize a company to come in, say, look, if you invest and you build the track and give all the locomotives and the monitoring and the insurance, we will let you exclusivity for 20 years to operate it and collect the revenue back. And that's how that comes together.
Of course. Of course. You don't have to ask.
What kind of entity do the big shipping companies and port companies need to hear from to get them to be willing to take this seriously? Because, IMEC is right now, there are bits and pieces, as we know, but it's not, quote unquote, happening. So who needs to talk to these companies, which I really see are, as you said, the muscle? They bring political muscle, economic muscle, everything. And they know how to get things done. So who needs to talk to them to tell them this is worth your while?
Well, again, as far as Trieste experience goes, shipping companies, especially in the container sector, the giants, we're talking first 5 operators, are also profoundly vertically integrating along the logistics chain since probably the beginning this millennia. So they know perfectly where the spice is, and they move, and they're first movers in many respects. So in this respect, they don't need to be told that there's an opportunity. For instance, in Trieste, there's a pier number 7, the only container terminal up to now that is managed by MSC. So it's player number 1, the Swiss-based but Italian, yes, managed, and operator number 1 worldwide in the container business, and is also owning rail traction companies, and it's also investing in logistics, in inland logistics, and so on. And in pier number 7 is one of the example of enlargement project, also in this case with public funds for the modernization of the pier. But for instance, pier number 8, which is the second container terminal that is going to be built, is a PPP. Now the gentleman left the room, but it's an example of successful PPP, private and public partnership in the maritime business. And in this case, the operator is Hamburg Hafen, which is Port of Hamburg, and a local, very important freight forwarder agent of Trieste. So this.
I almost think you're going to need the business coalition for IMEC. So instead, when I think of a track 2, I think the track 2 is a business coalition, is a business meeting. Maybe it's organized by a think tank. We've done that in my current, where I currently work, but I think, lots of institutions could do that. And I think there's you could also even create some sort of almost like a multi-country lobby network, you can call it that, but let's call it an advocacy network that you would create that would almost create like a bespoke network of stakeholders that are invested in the success of IMEC in the different parts of the business community.
Roy?
Maybe a couple of things. Carice, to your question, I can tell you from a few conversations I've had, some of which you know about, some of these companies are, as was said, they know about this, they're keen on this, they want to be part of it, they will be part of it, they'll be the first movers. They don't want to choose one corridor over another. They don't want to be in a and an IMEC over a BRI or at a
Trans-Caspian.
they want to trade, and so for them to be advocating on this and not the other doesn't serve their business interests. So, but they'll be there, and they're there in all ports and all positions. So I wouldn't be concerned about that. The other, I think, group that has to be a very big part of this, we've spoken about this as well, is the financial industry, both the multinational institutions, but also the private funds, the BlackRocks of the world. They need to think that this is worth their while to put some to support the private businesses, because they'll be coming to them to raise capital.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. With that, I would like to wrap up a very insightful panel and discussion with thought leaders from Europe, United States, and Israel, at least. Thank you very much, and I'll give you back 5 minutes before the next panel. Thank you.